Would you open up to the book of Hosea, please? Hosea Chapter 6. You know, we go around the room and talk about pain and difficulty and hurt, severe trials that we've gone through, difficult situations and relationships and all of that. You know, in one sense, humanity, the church, it's just a large group of people who are hurting and been hurt. But one thing that we learn is that when we go through pain, when we go through trials, it strengthens us on the other side of that, and it equips us to be messengers of the truth. I'm more equipped on the other side of that difficulty to be a messenger for what the Lord has for others. And it's not fun to go through those things, but man, it is certainly a blessing to be a comfort to others and to have that more powerful witness and testimony. And for Hosea, that was a very painful situation as well. Hosea married to his marriage to his unfaithful wife, Gomer. You know, as if it's not bad enough to be married to a Gomer, she's got to be unfaithful on top of that. But that's kind of the backdrop of the book of Hosea, is that in the same way that she has run out on him, it's a picture of how the nation of Israel had been unfaithful to the Lord. And so now, as we get here in what is about the middle of the book of Hosea, the picture that in the experience that he's had with his own marriage and his wife kind of drifts into the background, and that's not brought to our attention as clearly as much as the message that the Lord has to his unfaithful bride, the nation of Israel. And that kind of comes front and center. And so he's now preaching something that he knows not just theologically, but experientially. And that's powerful. And if he was just called to deliver this message without having gone through that pain and that hurt, Mrs. Scheffer, it's a really good time to silence your phone. Just joking. I'm not joking, but anyway. I'm not going to call anybody else out. I'll put it that way, okay? But he is. If he hadn't gone through this hurt and this pain, he could have the same message for the nation, but it wouldn't have that depth to it. And so, although I'm sure he would much rather have his wife not step out on him and cheat on him, he is able to deliver a super powerful message now to the nation of Israel. And so we left off on what was kind of a high note. If you were with us last week, we already looked at the first 3 verses of chapter 6, but I will read those again. Hosea chapter 6 begins with, "Come and let us return to the Lord." And this is the nation speaking. It's very optimistic. It says, "For he has torn us, but he will heal us. He has stricken, but he will bind us up. After 2 days, he'll revive us, and on the 3rd day, he'll raise us up that we may live in his sight." And again, perhaps an allusion to the resurrection and the fact that we are raised with him. This goes right along with what we're talking about in Colossians, you know, that we've died with him and that we are raised with him. And someday, you know, we will be with him in glory. But he goes on and says in verse 3, "Let us pursue the knowledge of the Lord. His going forth is as established or as sure as the morning, as sure as the dawn. He will come to us like the rain, like the latter and former rain to the earth." Hang on to that little phrase as we continue on. He comes to us like the rain, the latter and former rain. And so there's this picture that we talked about at the very beginning of chapter 6, which should really probably be, it's part of chapter 5. It should really be the close of chapter 5. And maybe even your Bible has, you know, a heading here after verse 3. But it says, man, the Lord is going to revive us. It's going to heal us. It's as sure as the dawn that's going to happen. That day is coming. In the latter days, that day is going to come, and it's still in the future for us, that the Lord is going to look to Jesus as the Messiah, and they'll be healed, and that's going to happen. And so, but right now, as Hosea is writing that, that's in the future for Hosea. It's in the future yet for us. But as he's writing this, the nation itself is on the precipice of disaster, and lots of allusions can be made. I don't want to attempt to say that I'm going to speak prophetically. That's not my intent at all. That, I'm not going to go around calling myself Prophet Tad or any of those things. But man, I certainly feel like there is a lot of similarities from where Israel is, or was there, to where we are right now. And so economically and militarily, the nation was as strong as it had ever been. It seemed invincible, unable to succumb to economic collapse, unable to the thought of maybe it even being thrown militarily. It seemed like a stretch of the imagination. But all of that was a facade. That's what the nation felt then. And again, I certainly think that's how people feel about the United States today. But all of it for Israel was a facade. As he pulled back the curtain and he's like exposing what's really going on, he sees that it starts with the fact that the nation is steeped in idolatry. There's worship of things other than the Lord himself. And as a result of that, we've seen that the families were falling apart, the economy that they trusted in, and we could look back and say it's about to collapse for them. And this military, the seemingly strong military, was going to get swept away by the Assyrians. And so the problem, like Hosea and Gomer, was that outwardly it looked like everything was fine. It looked like the nation of Israel had a relationship with the Lord, but there's no commitment to that. And so, as we've said time and again through our study here, that I think that's the most dangerous place to be, is in a non-committal relationship with the Lord, thinking that I'm okay with God. I'm fine. I do my religious things, and so God and I are good. And but there's no real commitment there. And as we're going to see, that's exactly where the nation of Israel was, and that's why they're on the precipice of disaster and collapse. And what can happen nationally can happen personally as well. And so there's these different pictures that we don't want to just simply look at it as a history thing. This is what happened to Israel, but we want to make some application as this can happen in my own life. And man, maybe even this is, a picture of what could happen to the United States. But let's pick up in verse 4 now. And the Lord continues his charge against both the northern kingdom of Israel and Judah. He says, "O Ephraim," that's the northern tribes, "what shall I do to you? O Judah," a reference to the southern tribes, "what shall I do to you?" And I'm going to pause right there. I couldn't think of like a better word, but what the word I could think of was exasperated. But the dictionary, when I looked up exasperated, it says annoyed to the point of anger. And so I don't think that's quite how the Lord feels about the nation when he says, "Oh Ephraim, what shall I do to you?" Or "Oh Judah, what shall I do to you?" But it's kind of, there probably is a word for this, and maybe it's like how we feel with kids sometimes. If you parents could maybe understand, you're like at wit's end, right? You love them, you want what's best for them, but you're at wit's end because you don't know what else to do for them, and they're just in this spot that's perplexing and frustrating to you all at the same time. And I know when Elijah was a baby, and he's not here so I can freely talk about him, but Charity managed the Olive Garden, and so I had 2 part-time jobs that were pretty flexible, but I was like dad a lot. She worked a lot of hours as the manager of Olive Garden, and right when he was a baby, and so I was dad for very long periods of time, and he was really colicky. Has anybody else ever had a colicky baby? Does anybody want to admit that they had a colicky baby? Becky's like, yeah, I've had several of them. All of them, no. Yeah, he could be rested and fed and have a clean diaper, but for no reason, just wailing and crying and crying and crying and crying. And it gets to the point where it's like, oh, Elijah, what shall I do to you? You know, I'm so full of love, but I don't know what else in the world I could do to make it right for you. Okay? Ultimately, it came down to, I called Charity one night of him just crying and crying and crying. And I'm like, I don't know how we're going to make it, but you've got to quit your job. So I can't do this anymore. So she's like, give me 3 months. I'm like, you have 2 weeks. So now the relationship that I use when I read this, and he's talking about Ephraim and Judah, is a parent and child. But again, the relationship comparison that the Lord is making is between a faithful husband and an unfaithful wife. And so the Lord, he's at wit's end. He doesn't know what to do, so to speak. And so here's why. So verse 4 continues, and he says, for your faithfulness is like a morning cloud. And like the early dew, it goes away. It sounds kind of nice talking about faithfulness, but what the Lord is saying, and I told you to hang on to those verses, those words from the very end of verse 3, the Lord's love for them was like a rain, like a latter and former rain. It's consistent and it's strong. But their love in return is like a dew. There's some moisture there, but it's here for one moment and then it's gone, you know. And that's how different the love the Lord has for them is, and how they were responding. As soon as the sun starts to shine, so to speak, it's gone. And so I think what he's going to get at, as we're going to see, is that the people were in this relationship with this non-committal relationship with the Lord. And they thought they were okay because they went through the religious practices, but it didn't mean anything to them. They showed up, and then they did some sacrifices, but then they went on with their lives and got involved in the things of the world. And so their faithfulness came and went like a cloud, like the dew. As a result, verse 5, therefore, because of this unfaithfulness that they've had, I have hewn them by the prophets. I have slain them by the words of my mouth, and your judgments are like light that goes forth. The judgments, the words of the prophets. And so, again, I was like, I slayed them with a mouth. I've dealt with them. I've dealt with their unfaithfulness through the prophets. Faithful men have spoken out to this unfaithful nation and their unfaithful practices like a lightning bolt that is just jettisoned across the sky, man. I have lit them up, but they've never let that truth, even though I've slayed them with the truth, they've never let that truth change their lives. And now he says, here's what he's kind of looking for in verse 6. And I encourage you, if you mark your Bibles, this is a great verse to mark. The Lord says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And anytime we can see this is what the Lord is not after, and this is what he is after, man, we should take note. He says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. And again, so obviously they're going through the motions. They're participating in the ceremony of relationship, but there's no commitment to the Lord involved. They're bringing a sacrifice. They're bringing a burnt offering, but then they step out with them. And the ritual is there, but there's no commitment. And so the sooner in life that we realize that the Lord isn't just looking for us to do religious things. Because I remember, and maybe you grew up that way, if you grew up in the church, you think, you just kind of think that that's what the Lord's after. He just wants you to do religious things. But the sooner that we realize that the Lord isn't after us to jump through hoops and do religious things, the better. He's not looking for us to say some Hail Marys, show up for Easter and Christmas, and maybe put baby Jesus in a verse on our Christmas cards and say, God bless you all. He's looking for more than that, And so the Lord's heart, it's not for church attendance, although he knows that our attendance is good. It's not in our sacrifice, or as it says, it's the offering is what it is. So he's not looking for the box to be filled every week, although giving is important. Is your life changed by who he is and what he's done for you? That's what he's after. That's what's important to me. It's not these religious things. And I'll tell you, when it's really powerful to be around people that understand that and that get that. And it's one of the things that first attracted us to Calvary Chapel. is that we found, like, man, here's a group of people that are living in a way where the Lord is affecting their life. We were on the west side. We weren't looking for a church the other day, but one week we went to Calvary Chapel, and then we got invited back the following week with this incentive of having lunch afterwards. And I'm like, well, now you've got my attention, right? If you're going to invite me to lunch. The service was great. The worship, the teaching was amazing. But it was that lunch actually afterwards, and not because the food was great, but that's when I knew I wanted to be a part of what was going on there. Because I grew up with a lot of religion. I grew up going to a Christian school. I grew up going to church twice on Sunday. We had a morning and an evening service, and I went to youth group and all of those things, but then you just go on with your normal life. Then it's back to normal. You're done doing the Jesus thing, and you clock out and you're done, kind of. And it was very moral, super moral, but Jesus wasn't a part of our other days. And the sooner we realize that it's not being moral that God is after. God's not looking for just people that are following rules, okay? And so we were moral, but Jesus wasn't a part of our life. But at this lunch that I went to, Charity was working still at that time. She wasn't able to be there, but it's me and these two other couples, and they were so old, they were like 50, and now I'm like, gosh, they were kids, right? But they're talking at this lunch after church about Jesus. And the one saying to them, I was like, man, I was reading, in 2 Corinthians the other day, and I thought, what the Lord is trying to teach me? And I'm like, I have never heard people talk this way outside of church, the four walls of church. And this is attractive. This is amazing. And I want to be a part of that. And this is what the Lord is after. It's what the Lord wants in our life. He doesn't want us to just show up, we're here on a Wednesday night. Whoop-de-doo, That's great. Is showing up on a Wednesday night Bible study? Yes, that's super. But it's relationship. Is the Lord changing your life? He's not looking for us to do more religious things. It's, are you being in a relationship with him? Are you being obedient to what he's telling you? Is your relationship with him affecting your life and affecting your decisions? And you'll know the story, most of you, from 1 Samuel 15, where the prophet Samuel gave Saul a to-do list of instructions from the Lord. They're battling the Amalekites, and the instructions are pretty easy. Wipe them out. Wipe everything out. They're past the point of no return. It'd be merciful right now to take care of the Amalekites completely. The animals, King Agag, all of it. Be done with. Saul thought, I got a better idea. I'll keep some of the best animals for myself. It's just reasonable, right? And then I'll keep King Agag alive as kind of a trophy. Well, Samuel rolls up later and he's like, how come you didn't obey the Lord? Don't you know you should be obeying the Lord? And Saul has the audacity to say, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. But then Samuel said, then what then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? I can hear the sheep right there. You're lying to me. And the lowing of oxen, which I hear. And so Saul at that point, instead of admitting, I did not do what the Lord has called me to do and right the ship, you read down a little bit further in 1 Samuel 15, and he says, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. And then he blames the people. And Samuel says to him, has the Lord as great a delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than that of the fat of rams. Man, it's obeying the voice of the Lord. That's what he's after, is having our lives changed by who he is and what he's done for us. And God wants our hearts. He doesn't want our actions. He doesn't want us to just jump through some hoops. He wants our hearts, and he wants every part of us. Not because he's power hungry. I'm God, and I have to get those guys at Calvary Chapel, Ellensburg to do what I want them to do. He wants that for us because that's what's best for us. When he tells us to do something, it's not just to add something to our list. It's because, Tad, this is what's good for you. Man, we are here. If you're here on Sunday, Tad, it's good for you to love your wife sacrificially. It's what's going to be best for you. And Charity, it's best for you to submit your husband. And yeah, that goes against your nature and all these other things, but he wants what's best for us, because the mechanical worship, it doesn't matter, Okay, sing a song, sit down, hear a sermon, drop some money in the box. Man, we serve an almighty God, and he is looking for a lot more from us than that. He wants relationship with us. He wants your life. Because he wants what's best for you. He wants what's best for me. That's what he's after. And so Israel did some ceremonial things, but there's no heart in it. And like an unfaithful marriage, they went through the motions, but there was no commitment. And so verse 7, it says, but like men, they transgressed the covenant. They dealt treacherously with me. Now, this is a really short sentence, this verse. In the Hebrew, it's only 4 words long. But if you have a footnote, or I think the ESV actually says it, men here can be translated as Adam. And Adam, man, it's the same word, or men. And so basically, like Adam, they've turned their backs on me and on the covenant. Adam had a covenant with me. I had a relationship with him, and he turned his back. He broke that relationship. And so like Adam, that's what you've done. And like Adam, there's going to be consequences to that. And then notice what he says in verse 8. He says, Gilead is a city of evildoers and defiled with blood. You're like, okay. Verse 9, a band of robbers lie in wait for a man. So the company of what, thieves? No, company of priests murder on the way to Shechem. Surely they, the priests, commit lewdness, and that's talking about sexual sin. Now here's what's interesting, just in casual glance, you might not pick this up, but both Ramoth Gilead, which it's referring to here, and Shechem, these 2 cities that he talks about, are called cities of refuge. And if you're not familiar with cities of refuge, when the nation moved into the promised land, they divided the land into tribal areas, right? But the tribe of Levi did not get a territory of their own. Instead, the tribe of Levi received 48 cities, and they were spread throughout. I encourage you to maybe look up a map sometime, but they're just like equally spread throughout the whole promised land. And it was kind of like the priests are never going to be that far away, these 48 cities, right? Well, 6 of those 48 cities are what was called the city of refuge. And as you may be aware, there's no prison system in ancient Israel, because justice was dealt with quickly and it was dealt with decisively. If there was murder, it was a death sentence. There's no question. Just squelch it right now. It's done with, okay? But if there was a death that was accidental or unintentional, and those certainly happened in the example that Scripture gives of someone's chopping wood and the axe head flies off and hits him, right? An accidental death. Then those 6 cities, those cities of refuge, where the person that committed that accidental or unintentional murder could flee to one of those cities, so that the kinsman redeemer, the avenger of blood, that was the justice system, right? That they had a refuge from the next of kin demanding justice from them. It was accidental. If it was intentional, no, you're getting the death sentence. You're not welcome in a city of refuge. But if it's accidental, if it's unintentional, they flee to one of these cities of refuge, okay? That's the backdrop of Ramoth Gilead here and Shechem. 2 of these cities of refuge, these places that should be providing peace. It says it's gotten so bad that even these cities are filled with wickedness. They're filled with bloodshed, and the bloodshed is actually coming by the hands of the priests themselves. The priests are committing murder. There's lewdness. Man, it's craziness out there. It's Hunger Games out there right now, when these should be the places that someone feels at ease and at peace. It's not happening. It's completely the opposite of how God intended it. And so he says in verse 11, I've seen a horrible thing in the house of Israel. There's harlotry of Ephraim. Israel is defiled. Also, O Judah, the southern kingdom, a harvest is appointed for you when I return the captives of my people. And so again, even though these people, they bring the offerings, they're not committed to the Lord, and the priests haven't been representing the Lord. And so the land is full of sin, it's full of bloodshed, it's full of immorality. And again, man, does this sure sound familiar or what? And he says the cause is this harlotry, this spiritual harlotry, because you have not honored our covenant. I have a covenant with you. I want to be in relationship with you, but you've broken that off. And so the Lord adds, man, Judah's right there with you, but there's going to be a harvest coming. There's going to be consequences to your sin, and you're going to reap what you sow. If you sow to the wind, as the word says, you're going to reap the whirlwind. But that's not the Lord's heart. Let's look at chapter 7, verse 1. He says, when I would have healed Israel, that's the Lord's heart. It's the Lord's heart for America as well. I want to heal them. But then, I want to heal you, but then the iniquity of Ephraim was uncovered, and the wickedness of Samaria, and they've committed fraud. A thief comes in, a band of robbers takes spoil outside. Now, that phrase, iniquity uncovered, and maybe your translation might say something a little bit different if you don't have a New King James version, but the idea is flaunted. It's their iniquity, their sin, their wickedness. It's flaunted. Would you check this out? The verse begins, I would have healed you. That's my heart. But instead of waiting, for the latter days, I would have done that right now. But instead of turning to me, you've pressed further into your sin and you flaunt it. In Jeremiah 6, it says, in fact, the people got so bad that they don't even blush anymore, man. They're proud of their sin. They're not embarrassed of their sin. Again, this hits close to home. Proverbs 14, verse 34 says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace. And we're right there. There used to be a time when our country, and it wasn't that long ago, was ashamed of sin, ashamed of homosexuality, ashamed of adultery, ashamed of drug use. And now we provide a place, here's a safe place for you to do what used to be illegal drugs. We used to be ashamed of all those things, but like Israel, we flaunt it. We celebrate that which the enemy supports. It's completely backwards, and we have pride parades. And all of it, man, we're flaunting that which should be a disgrace to us. And so, verse 2, they do not consider in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. Now their deeds have surrounded them. They're before my face. They can't hide from God. It's been said, it's not like you can't hide from him, he's out to get you, but you can't hide from him because he loves you so much. He's not taking his eyes off of you. And even if they're in sins, like I see that, man, I see all that. It started in your hearts. Verse 2, they did not consider in their hearts. They didn't consider this is sin, this is wickedness, this is going against what the Lord is calling me to. And in their hearts, they thought, man, I can get away with this. But now, it's what started there. It's all out in the open. It's uncovered. It's flaunted. They're proud of it. Verse 3, they make a king glad with their wickedness. This is a really interesting verse to me. They make a king glad with their wickedness and princes with their lies. Why would the king be glad with wickedness and prince with their lies? And again, I think this hits close to home. Political leaders love wickedness. But why? Why do they? You ever stop to think about why? Why is there government-sponsored sin? Why is there safe places to shoot up? And why do they promote all sorts of premarital sex and homosexuality? It's government-sponsored. It's in our public schools, but why? Why is that the case? It's because when the government creates or enables a problem, the government gets the power handed to them to come up with a solution. It's all a power play. If we can create a crisis, then we get to save you from that crisis. We get more power. And I don't want to go off on what's happening in today's world, but it is what is happening in today's world. Let's create a problem so that we can come up with a solution, and you'll hand over more power to us. And in the end, what's going to happen? What's the enemy after? You guys are in the inside track here, okay? I plan on teaching the book of Revelation again in January. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about is that the enemy is after a global government. It's what he's after, right? And if we can create, based on what I just said, the government creates problems, or as it says here, kings are glad with wickedness. The government creates problems so that they can be the solution to those problems, right? It happens nationally, but what the enemy wants is a global government. And so what he needs is a global crisis. And then he can have a global solution. And then people will hand over their rights, and they'll we think worship the Antichrist and all that. The word worship means to bow your will. I'm going to bow my will to this entity. I don't want to do this, but I'm going to give myself over and submit to this entity. We are right there, guys. Anyway, coming in January, unless if the Lord tarries. But I'd love to not have to teach that book and experience the rapture instead. But anyway, okay. Verse 4, they are all adulterers, like an oven heated by a baker. He ceases stirring the fire after kneading the dough until it is leavened. Okay, so he's got this baking metaphor, and he's like, this is what it's like. The sin that they're involved in, all this bloodshed, all the wickedness, all the immorality, the lewdness, all of that, it's like a baker getting his oven up to temp, right? Okay, we're getting it stoked, and then he says he ceases stirring it. And then verse 5, in the day of our king, princes have made him sick, inflamed with wine. He stretched out his hand with scoffers. They prepared their heart like an oven while they lie in wait. Their baker sleeps all night. Okay, he's still got this fire going. And in the morning, it burns like a flaming fire. And so the oven is heating up. We're adding sin to it. But now I think I control this. I'm just going to cease that this is exactly the right amount of sin I want, exactly the right amount of fire. But now, man, he slept through the night, and what happened? The sin is out of control. They thought, I can keep this under control. And this is what we all do with our sin, right? I can control this. This is my little sin, and I'm going to control this, right? And as long as I do my God thing too, this thing's permissible to me. But the very thing here, it says that they thought they could control, it overcame them, like a fire. Proverbs 6 says, can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes not be burned? And it's talking about getting involved with an adulterous woman, right? But the point is the same. You mess with fire, you mess with sin, you're going to get burned in the end. It always happens. It always happens. That's what sin does. And so verse 7 says they're all hot like an oven, and they've devoured their judges. All their kings have fallen. None among them calls upon me. If you guys got that list of kings that I handed out earlier, I know probably not all of you have that, but if you have this and you look at the northern kingdom of Israel, and you see there that by the time that Hosea is living is towards the end of this list, it's murdered, died, murdered. Man, there's just assassination after assassination. The kings are dying. It says the kings are fallen, yet none among them calls upon me. Man, politically, things are just off the deep end now, but still the people aren't calling upon me. Ephraim, instead, it says, has mixed himself among the people. He's compromised with the other nations. Ephraim, he says, verse 8b, is like a cake unturned. Okay? Maybe we could say an unflipped pancake. Okay? How many of you guys have put pancakes on and then got caught up doing something else, and you're like, oh darn, I forgot that pancake, right? And one side is gross and crusty, and the other side is still gooey, ooey. Has anybody ever eaten that? No. No, it's disgusting. Both sides are gross. Both sides are wrong. And what Jesus would say in the book of Revelation, it's like being lukewarm. It's a mixture of hot and cold. I want to spew this out of my mouth. But that's what they're doing. They've compromised with these foreign gods. And now, because they've given themselves over to this hot and cold, this lukewarmness, this ooey gooey on flip pancake, now their time is up. It says in verse 9, aliens, these other nations, have devoured his strength, but he doesn't know it. Now, did you know that this verse is actually above the gateway into Area 51? Aliens have devoured his strength, but he does not know it. I'm joking. It's not there. Yes, gray hairs are here and there on him, yet he does not know it. That's what my kids think about me. But I say, they're not gray, they're silver. They're just silver. You get me, Dane. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Silver, I don't know, just sounds more distinguished than saying gray. But it says he doesn't even know it. He doesn't even realize my strength is gone. My hair's turning gray. I'm getting old and frail. My time is up, is what it's saying. And he doesn't even know. The nation doesn't know their time is up. Verse 10, the pride of Israel testifies to his face. And he's hearing this, but he's just not getting it. But they do not return to the Lord their God, nor seek him for all of this. This sin has caused them to be oblivious to how desperate their situation was. And that's what it'll do. If you're involved in something right now that you think you got a control of and you got it handled, it's not a big deal for you. Man, would you be careful? Be more than careful. Turn from that. Just get away from that because it wants to control you. And so he says they won't turn to the Lord. Instead, look at who they turn to. It says in verse 11, Ephraim also is like a silly dove without sense. They call to Egypt and they go to Assyria. They won't come to me, but they're going there. And, Jesus says, be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. And there's a reason why he didn't say be as, wise as doves and harmless as serpents, because serpents are harmful and doves are not smart. Doves are a lot of beautiful things in Scripture, but here they're a picture of, not being smart. And the nation has become bird brains. They're looking for answers in all the wrong places. They're going to Egypt. They're going to Assyria. They're seeking the world's help, but they won't seek their God's help. Wherever they go, verse 12, I will spread my net on them. I will bring them down like the birds of the air. I will chastise them according to what their congregation has heard. Now, this isn't a threat, okay? Sometimes we read these passages like this is a threat. Man, I'm gonna get you, okay? This people is going in the wrong direction. They're going into what is going to cause them more harm and more pain. And so when it says, I'm going to spread my net, I'm going to bring them down, man, I'm going to have you cease from moving away from me. I'm putting a net over you to put an end to this. This is mercy. It's grace that I'm going to stop you from continuing to cause damage to yourself. Verse 13, woe to them, for they have fled from me. Destruction to them because they've transgressed against me, though I redeemed them. That's my heart. Don't read, man, I want to destroy them, but no, I want to redeem them. Yet they have spoken lies against me. Verse 14, they did not cry out to me with their heart. When they wailed upon their beds, they assembled together for grain and new wine. They rebel against me. And again, if you have a different translation, I believe that this is maybe not the best in the New King James here, but it's when they did not cry out to me with their heart when they wailed upon their beds. They slashed themselves. They cut themselves is really what that should be translated, and you might have that in another translation. And so when they're in their beds and they're weeping and crying and these things are so bad, I can't believe the situation that we're in. He says, they're not crying out to me. Instead, they're cutting themselves. They're doing the practices of Baal worship and these foreign gods, which ultimately, it always leads back to, it's the practice, that's the enemies behind self-mutilation. And that's what they're involved in. Verse 15, though I disciplined and strengthened their arms, yet they devise evil against me. They return, but not to the Most High. They're like a treacherous bow. Their princes fall by the sword for the cursings of their tongue. This shall be their derision in the land of Egypt. They return, they're broken up, they're weeping. The problem isn't the emotions of it. They have all the emotions. They're turning, they're just not turning to the Lord. And so they're going through the motions. They're practicing ritual. They're doing these things, but they're just not coming to the Lord. And the Lord doesn't want rituals. And if there's one thing that, man, I hope we picked up on tonight, and even for my own life, is the Lord isn't looking for rituals. He's not looking for me to jump through religious hoops. He wants something real from me. Psalm 51, verse 7 and 17. Psalm 51, 17. Maybe write that in your margins here. It says, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit and a broken and contrite heart. These, oh God, you will not despise. This is what the Lord wants. He wants us to offer up ourselves. Not dropping a check in the box, not leading a lamb to the slaughter or cutting a bull's throat or any of those things. What he wants is to offer ourselves a broken spirit and a contrite heart. I want you to do away with your pride. That's what I want you to sacrifice. That's what I will not despise in your life. If you're looking for a sacrifice that the Lord will never turn down from you, it's when you say no more pride. It's going away. I don't want it. And the best things about me, the best that I am, is just a sinner saved by grace. Because that's the thing, right? Is that pride keeps us from receiving. I think I just maybe mentioned this last week, or just recently, that what keeps us from receiving is thinking we already have something. That's the greatest threat to our receiving something. It's the greatest threat to receiving knowledge, is to think I already have it. Right? And so the greatest threat in receiving the blessings that God has for us is pride, because I don't need this. I don't want it. I don't need it. And so what the Lord wants from us, and Chris, maybe you could come up and again, let's just spend maybe just a minute or two, and then we'll close with a song, but spend a minute or two just acknowledging, Lord, there's selfishness in me. There's pride in me that has to go. And I'm sorry, and I apologize, and I have this contrite heart, this broken spirit, that I have caused pain to those around me, unwittingly, unknowingly sometimes, but I've done this. And I've caused pain to myself by decisions that I've made. So often easy and point out, that person hurt me, and that person hurt me, and that person hurt me. And it's easy to sacrifice someone else's pride. What the Lord won't turn down from us is sacrificing our own. Man, I've hurt others around me. I've hurt myself by decisions I've made. And most of all, let's just spend some time saying, Lord, I've sinned against you. I've sinned against your love for me. And so here I am. I'm just here with my broken heart. Nope. I want to just do away with the pride and I just want to offer myself to you, because I know that when I give you myself, that's what you won't turn down. Let's just spend a few minutes in prayer.